So, why we've decided to make this session is basically there are a lot of reasons. And a lot of reasons for not only those who are maybe starting their new ideas and companies, but also for those who are considering to implement something new right inside their current organizations. For decades, hiring has been one of the hardest parts of building a company, and I would even say not just a company, but the right team who may bring the idea to life. And that's where a company starts. A strong startup is based on the right people behind it, and that's the foundation we are talking about today. I'm warmly welcoming Surobheet Bhowmik, the group head of HR at Capitalmind Financial Services. With over a decade of experience, Surobheet has led scale HR transformations and built really high performance teams at organizations like Piramal Finance and Embibe. A specialist in organizational performance, our today's guest focuses on scaling people and culture in lockstep with business growth. So, Rabhit, my pleasure to meet you and welcome you at our today's session.
Thanks, Renata, for having me here. Looking forward.
Sounds perfectly. So then let's proceed. As you may remember, prior to making our session, we discussed the topic of hiring of HR. We do really understand that recruitment and HR are two different categories, right?
Hmm.
And you should always be aware of this when you try to hire a person who will build in the team. Nearly 70% of venture capital backed fintech startups still fail under regulatory and competitive pressure, right? So, especially when it comes to launching the ideas, because launching the ideas always lead to hiring people or hiring the right people, it's better saying, right? Because this is the topic of today's webinar. And these hiring trends already reflect the stat. For instance, in fintech, compliance-related roles rose by 56% in 2024. That was the stat I saw when getting prepared to this session today. And the research from McKinsey shows that cross-functional teams, this is where operators, technologies, maybe legal and maybe risk management teams, um, they work side by side. They significantly outperform separated teams in both execution and productivity. And this is not just from the theory, it also works well in practice. And
Hmm.
here's the first question to you, Sarabjit. From your experience at ICICI Bank and Piramal Finance, or maybe just from the industry itself, because fintech is the most regulated environment. And though we are talking not just about fintech today, but about startup itself in general, right? Maybe you could give your thoughts and insights. What foundational roles are critical, really critical, when building a startup team in regulated industries, especially in industries like fintech or financial services?
Yeah, that's a crucial question because building a startup in a regulated space like fintech isn't like building a standard SaaS company or any other software company. In traditional tech, the rule is simple: move fast and break things. However, in financial services, if you break things, you lose people's life savings and you get shut down by the regulator. That's a
Mhm.
high likelihood. So,
Mhm.
from my time at regulated institutions like Piramal Finance, ICICI Bank, and in my current organization as well, uh, I have found that you need to establish a very specific tension within
Mhm.
your founding team. You need foundational roles that balance aggressive innovation with institutional discipline. I look at it this in the way of few foundational pillars. The first foundational pillar would be the compliance and the risk function.
Mhm.
Often, startups in the regulated space hire compliance or risk officers slightly late into their journey, or they hire people whose default answer is no. The most critical foundation hire in such kind of a regulated space when a company is building bottoms up is risk and compliance, who can act as a strategic co pilot. You need someone who deeply understands the regulatory guardrails uh, and tell the product and engineering team that here is the boundary. Here is where we need to draw the line, and here is how you can innovate safely within it. The second foundational pillar is the systems level technical architect. In your in fintech or regulated uh, environments, your infrastructure is in a way your product. You
Mhm.
need an engineering leader who inherently builds for scale, security, and auditability from the very day zero. If you build a platform with a spaghetti tape and code, the technical debt won't slow you down. It will cause a regulatory breach. I always look for tech leaders who understands lean principles, that is eliminating waste while building robust and high integrity systems. And for me, the third foundational pillar would be getting a translational product leader. You
Mhm.
need a product leader who can live in two worlds. They must understand the heavy, complex logic of the financial regulations and underwriting, but at the same time, should be able to translate that into a frictionless and consumer grade user experience. So, as an HR leader, my focus isn't just on titles or resume, but the psychological makeup of these individuals. When I'm evaluating these foundational hires, I'm looking for a very specific behavioral profile. They need the high agency, high velocity mindset of a startup founder, combined with the rigorous risk awareness of the legacy banker. That is a rare combination, and that is why we rely heavily on structured behavioral event interviewings and psychometric evaluations to ensure that we aren't just hiring for technical skill, but for the precise cognitive balance a regulated startup demands. So I hope I have answered what you're looking for in the first place.
To be honest, looks really comprehensively. And when it comes to real experience, I bet it costed you a lot to come to these conclusions within years. And I fully agree here because you're not just hiring when it comes to a leader, right, who will manage the team. You're not hiring the person who will lead people behind the startup, but you're hiring the person who will lead the entire organization. People
Absolutely.
are inside this organization, right? And inside the idea which is on the go and ongoing when it comes to launching and being launched to the market. From my own experience through years, team alignment in any company really changes, and it depends on the business, on its complexity, on its location, on its mentality and cultural dependencies, I can say so, right, and differences. And it hugely relates to startups as well. Deloitte's research, which I investigated, shows that product centric organizations require significantly higher levels of cross functional role clarity to scale successfully. That's almost the same what you were talking about a couple of seconds ago. Yet, here's it's important to know that technical founding teams consistently outperform in enterprise and operational sectors, while investors continue to point to people and organizational structure. Here, not just even products as the biggest reason companies fail. So imagine structures and people who create the structure may either push your business to success or may let it down. This is the important note. And having worked at John Deere and some related companies and related industries, Surabhit, how should founders think about team structure maybe differently especially in product heavy or operations driven business compared to digital startups because they're really different and you cannot apply the same rules to both.
Hmm. That's a fascinating contrast, Renata. My experience at organization like John Deere fundamentally changed how I think about team design. In digital startups, teams are typically built for speed, flatter structures, rapid iteration, and a bias for experimentation because the cost of failure is relatively low and reversible. But in product heavy or operations driven businesses, that logic breaks down completely. Here, every decision has downstream consequences across manufacturing, supply chain, distribution, and consumer experience. So you're not just building a product, you are running an interconnected system, an ecosystem in a way. So decision makers and founders need to think differently on multiple dimensions. The first dimension here would be uh, depth over speed, rather
Mm-hmm.
than the other way around, which is there in the startup, speed over depth.
Yeah.
So when I say depth over speed, I mean you need functional expertise much earlier in digital and a strong in digital ecosystems. A strong generalist can hold things together for a while. In operations, weak expertise shows up immediately as quality issues, delays, cost overruns. The second dimension would be structure over fluidity. In startups, it is the other way around. It is fluidity over structure. So in digital startups, they thrive on ambiguity and loosely defined roles, because that is what it is asked.
Mm-hmm.
That is what is the need of the environment. Uh, in operations heavy setups, I believe lack of clarity creates a lot of friction across the value chain. You need well defined and well oiled ownership structure, because the
Mm-hmm.
interdependencies are high. And the third would be integration over silos. And that is where many decision makers get it wrong. They build functions, but siloed functions.
Mm-hmm.
There is no connective tissue between them. In product heavy organizations or operations heavy organizations, the real strength lies in how engineering, manufacturing, supply chain, sales, they are tightly coordinated. That defines how and how much you will succeed in the longer run. And that is the integration, and that integration sort of defines and drives the consistency at scale. And finally, there's a mindset shift that is required. In digital startup space, you optimize for learning velocity.
Mm-hmm.
However, in operations heavy environment, you optimize for execution reliability. If decision makers don't recognize this early, they end up importing digital ways of working into environments where cost of error is far higher. And that's when things start breaking at scale.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose
Mhm.
here only people who are outside the business may disagree with you, because usually it's quite and closely similar to what's happening at the moment, right? Over decades, the environment doesn't change when it comes to applying these rules. And we talked a lot about the structures. We talked a lot right by this moment about leadership, right? Yet when you start to dive deeper into the topic, you understand that it's not only about structures and people behind the structures, but also about alignment inside the teams. And here is another reason for failure, because alignment is about how people communicate, discuss challenges, right? Overcome those challenges when doing business and launching the ideas. If I'm not mistaken, Harvard Business Review, their research found that around 60 or maybe a bit over than 60% of high potential startups fail due to co-founder conflict. And it looks really like who leads problem often becomes bigger than product problems. And here a real example, we all heard about it, the recent issue, leadership issue around Mira Murati and Sam Altman and their businesses and their ideas, the ideas that they are leading at the moment, right? This example showed how quickly alignment, trust, and decision making can become critical under pressure when people not just simply telling a crossword, right? They're just
Mhm.
arguing. They are damaging, they are destroying the foundation they built for years. Thus, the strongest founding teams are rarely the ones that agree on everything, probably right, but the ones that align early on the things and that matter for them, right, for each of them, most when the company gets tested. So, a very challenging question here. Across your roles, what are the most important areas co-founders must align on early to avoid breakdowns as the company grows, especially when it comes to leadership, especially when it comes to leadership and connection to people who are under them and who they should lead in order to manage the processes, structures, and let the idea get into the market?
A very interesting question, Renata. Uh, across my career, having worked with multiple high growth, high velocity, organizations, I have seen and I have felt, and I've heard from my peers who have worked in such kind of ecosystems,
Mm-hmm.
that there are many co-founders who tend to think that alignment means we get along or we
Mm-hmm.
share the same vision. But in the longer run, that's quite naive. Because companies don't break down because of misaligned vision. They
Mm-hmm.
break because of unspoken assumptions on power, money, and decisions that
Mm-hmm.
surface under pressure. So, across my experience, one pattern has been consistent. Early stage misalignment between the founding team and the employees whom they hire don't show up when things are going well. It starts showing up when the business hits a certain inflection point of stress.
Mm-hmm.
And by them, it's usually too late to fix the structural gaps. And
Mm-hmm.
there are multiple areas where alignment, as per me, is absolutely non-negotiable. The first area is decision rights.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who decides what and how disagreements are resolved whenever there is a conflict. That is one of the founding pillars that needs to be there in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
See, consensus sounds very good in theory, but in practice, it slows down organizations and creates silent power struggles. Decision makers need clarity on where authority sits. If there are too many people having authority on the same value chain, then it will eventually slow down your process.
Mm-hmm.
The second foundational pillar would be where I believe absolutely non-negotiable in terms of where alignment should be there is the ambition and risk appetite. Within the same decision making team, you'll find people who would be having a very high risk appetite vis-a-vis those who might not be having that high of a risk appetite, whose risk appetite might be really low. So the the key question becomes, are we building for aggressive scale
Mm-hmm.
or are we building for controlled growth?
Mm-hmm.
Are we willing to take regulatory, financial, or reputational risks?
Mm-hmm.
Misalignment here leads to constant strategic friction. The
Mm-hmm.
third aspect, as per me, is the roles and boundaries. In my opinion, not just titles,
Mm-hmm.
but the real ownership is what needs to be defined.
Mm-hmm.
Where does one founder's mandate ends and where does the other's mandate begins? So lack of clarity creates duplication at best and a political conflict at worst. And the fourth, elementary pillar where I believe alignment is absolutely non-negotiable would be uh, how do they define success and the time horizon associated with it. Is the goal to build, scale, and exit, or to create a long-term institution? We will
Mm-hmm.
find many startups who will cater to the first cohort, build, scale, and exit. Now,
Mm-hmm.
these may sound philosophical, but they directly influence decision on multiple things. They influence decisions on hiring, the strategy, how the capital would be used. And there's one more layer that the decision makers and founders usually ignore. That is,
Mm-hmm.
how do they handle conflict?
Mm-hmm.
Because disagreements are inevitable. Sooner
Mm-hmm.
or later, they will evolve. But the real question is, when a conflict surfaces, how is it resolved? How is it avoided? And whether it is allowed to compound. So, if I have to summarize, alignment is not about shared vision statements. It's about the explicit agreements of
Surabheet, looks like we lost you for a couple of seconds, but it's not a problem. Sounds like a very interesting idea for finding the right people who get aligned on your vision, who get aligned on what's happening around the brand, who get aligned on every day with cultures, because looks like early hires are a big deal since they make up culture, speed execution, and decision making standards for everyone who comes after. And what I would say that kind of probably everyone in their career, um, or maybe in the current world and the experience of the existing institutions, seen us that in the earliest stages of a startup, people rarely join for stability. And here is maybe a question to Surobheet. Thanks for rejoining us. Would be nice to understand, because we've communicated a lot about the idea of alignment. I'm very thankful for the fact that you've shared those secrets with us, and it really looks like it's a big deal to get new hires to the team, right? Because they form the structure, they form the basis, they form this foundation, which will rule the idea further to the market. In your experience, maybe we could dive deeper for sure if it's allowed by you, and if it's allowed by the industries and the brands you led before. What defines a strong first set of hires? It's not only about alignment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there are some more secrets, especially when it comes to cross-cultural teams and international businesses.
See, before that, I would like to understand. I think my internet went off, and I hope you were able to hear my answer on the
Indeed,
previous
we heard
question.
everything.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great, great. Cool. So, coming to your current question regarding what defines a strong set of hires. See, to be very honest, in high growth environments, the first set of hires disproportionately define how the organization will scale, not just in capability, but
Mm-hmm,
in behavior and decision making. From what I've seen in my career, strong early hires have few defining characteristics.
mm-hmm,
First, they are builders and not just passengers.
mm-hmm,
They won't wait for structure, they will create it. In early stages, if someone needs clarity before acting, they slow the entire value chain down. The second is they operate above their role. You're not hiring for a job description in high growth environments, you're hiring for the slope. The best early hires think in terms of business impact and not
mm-hmm,
just functional boundaries. The third aspect is they have high ambiguity tolerance and low tolerance for chaos.
mm-hmm,
This is where most hiring goes wrong. People either crave structure and struggle, or they embrace chaos without bringing discipline. You need individuals who can impose order without
mm-hmm.
waiting for it.
Indeed.
Another pillar is the first set of hires. They need to have strong judgment, not just skill.
Mm-hmm,
In scaling environments, decisions are made with incomplete data. Skills help you execute, but judgment determines whether you're solving the right problem in the first place or not. And one more thing that the decision makers often underestimate in a high growth environment, these are the hires that will define your culture far more than any mission or vision statement or the culture tenets that you'll put on the walls of your company. If your early team cuts corners, tolerate mediocrity, and operate in silos, that becomes the default operating system of the company. So, if I had to distill it, the
mm-hmm,
first set of hires should not just be capable individuals, in my
mm-hmm,
opinion.
mm-hmm.
They should be force multipliers who raise the bar, create structure, and set non negotiable standards on how work gets done.
Fully agree with you. Like people who set the rules for excellence, right, in order to lead the brand. Until
Absolutely,
then,
absolutely. Those who write the rules instead of waiting for a piece of paper with the rules written on it.
mm-hmm,
That's what you need in the first set of hires. Yeah, when you scale, eventually, when you have to put a structure, when you become too big, Then you need specialists, then you need to create silos, then you need to bring people who have a particular skill set.
Hmm.
But in the beginning, you need far more agility in people whom you are getting in.
Fully agree. And maybe you saw this difference between people who were joining companies and people who were joining big ideas. Many of the first employees at companies like Apple and some other giants were driven more by belief in the mission, belief in the idea, more than by compensation. And that opinion still exists today, yet hiring to such companies has become far more competitive. And if I'm not mistaken, Deloitte's research points to a growing global readiness gap, with over than 80% of companies struggling to find the right talent. I bet you face the same through your career as an HR executive. So, for early stage startups, looks like without brand recognition, big salaries, or market credibility, attracting strong people becomes less about bonuses and more about clarity, trust, and conviction. Because until you earn your first billion, you won't be able to convince people that your idea really is worth their contribution, right? So when a startup doesn't yet have brand value or compensation leverage, how can it realistically attract and assess high quality talent? Maybe you could share some secrets, some examples from your own career, or maybe from someone's experience that you're allowed to share. Would be nice to get that.
See, that's a classic founder's dilemma. If you
Mm-hmm.
try to compete with legacy brands or big tech on base salary or brand prestige, you are bound to lose every single time. So
Absolutely.
you have to change the battlefield. You have to compete on one axis where big companies are structurally weak, the asymmetric scope. When you don't have the brand value or compensation leverage, you don't have deep pockets in the beginning. You have to be very honest about your proposition. You're
Mm-hmm.
not competing on certainty. You're competing on learning velocity, ownership, and upside. And there
Mm-hmm.
are, few levers that actually work. The first lever is a sharp and a credible narrative, not just hype. See, candidates are sharp enough to see through that in minutes. Here is where you need to be bluntly honest. Be explicit about the problem you're solving, why it matters, and what's still broken. The best talent is attracted to a hard and meaningful problem statement, not polished pitches. The second area would be where real ownership is with visible impact. If someone is taking a pay or brand discount, they need disproportionate scope. That means they need higher decision rights, not just responsibility. If they are able to see how their work will move business, how their work will impact the bottom line,
Mm-hmm.
they will stay. The third asymmetric upside would be, in all likelihood, equity exposure and an accelerated career path. The decision makers or the founders need to be clear. The upside only works if it's credible and understandable. Now on assessment, and this is where many early stage companies get it wrong. They rely on interviews, and in my opinion, in my decade long experience, interviews are low signal. In early stage environments, you need evidence of how people think and operate and how well they speak. So I would focus on a few things. The first one would be, uh, in addition to an interview
Mm-hmm.
or a conversation, I would also see some work simulations. I would
Mm-hmm.
give them some case scenarios that they have dealt with. And that case scenario should also be what I am realistically looking to solve for. I
Mm-hmm.
would see how they structure it, what trade-offs they make, and how they articulate their decisions.
Mm-hmm.
The second aspect is where I would focus would be a track record of building, not just working. So I would look for moments where they have created something from scratch, fixed something that was broken, and operated without too much of a hand holding or too much of a support.
Mhm.
To me, titles are irrelevant. Behavioral proof and the actual track record of building matters. And the third would be a reference check that goes beyond validation. I won't ask them where they were they good. Obviously, they would answer 10 out of 10 times, yes, they were good.
Mhm.
Who would say that I was not good? I would rather
Mhm.
say, I would rather ask, when did you fail?
Mhm.
What were those pressure points where you flumbered, where you could not do well? And if I'm getting an answer which is bluntly honest, but if I'm able to see some green shoots after they have failed,
Mhm.
that is a person I would like to hire. So if I have to summarize, when you lack the branding and the cash, your only real currency is authenticity and rigor. Authenticity in how you position the opportunity, and rigor in how you evaluate the talent. Anything less, and you are either going to attract the wrong people or lose the right ones whom you have already hired very quickly.
Looks like to wrap it up, it's better saying if you are not aware of how to hire correctly, hire those people who know how to do this, like
Mhm.
Surabheet, right? And receive the right team from day one or two. So, yeah, we've talked a lot about, throughout our conversation, we talked a lot about leadership alignment. So I wish we could skip this topic for a while and could dive deeper into the following. Imagine we've got the right team, we've got the right leader for it, right? Now we can drive fast. And you told us about the speed for startups, right? And what defines and what basically allows to differentiate startups among other well-established companies. As they say, speed is often a startup's biggest advantage, but as teams grow, chaos eventually stops being productive in every company, not only in startups. And McKinsey's research on organizational agility found that while structure is necessary for scale, poorly implemented processes and role definitions can slow decision making by as much as 30%. And this is a very important and interesting point to an HRD, or because HRD is usually kind of seen by the community of professionals from two separate angles, from the angle of HR BP and from the angle of HR BB, right? So you either do your business for people, or you do it for business itself, right?
Mhm.
Um, a question to you: at what point should founders introduce structure and really define roles without slowing down decision making, and define roles especially in the way that allows and helps the business to go faster, to go smoothly, and to drive people who drive this business? So here we're talking about something in between for people, in between for business, which is always and usually a challenge.
Hmm. See, if you wait for the right stage, I believe you have already waited too long. Structure isn't a milestone; it's a mindset, and it's a response to a increasing complexity and decision friction. The mistake that the founding team make is swinging between chaos and bureaucracy instead of designing just fast enough
Mm-hmm.
uh, to structure the way to keep things intact. See, there isn't a single trigger point where you'd introduce structure. It
Mm-hmm.
should come in incrementally as complexity starts to outpace clarity. So, in my experience across the high growth, high velocity organizations and the more structured ones, there are a few clear signals that founders should wait for. The first signal should be when decisions are getting revisited or delayed. If the same topics keep coming back or
Mm-hmm.
require multiple approvals, it's a sign that the decision rights are unclear.
Mm-hmm.
The second area, or the second signal would be
Mm-hmm.
if the accountability is refused. When outcomes are owned by teams instead of individuals, execution starts slipping. Think of it this way. I've seen while hiring a junior employee, there are 6 to 7 rounds of interviews. Is
Wow.
it actually? I've seen it multiple places. Organizations call it we want to hire the right people, but for hiring a junior engineer, do you need six round of interviews? And
Here's my question as
mostly,
well. For what?
and
What
and and,
for?
and you know what? In all those 5 or 6 round of interviews, there would be a set of questions that would be asked repeatedly
Mm-hmm.
by different set of individuals. So
Mm-hmm.
what is that you're looking for? Is it accountability or is it deflection of accountability? See,
Mm-hmm.
what happens when 1 or 2 person take an interview and hire someone? If the
Mm-hmm.
hiring goes south, if the quality of hire is not up to the mark, those
Mm-hmm.
2 people would be castigated. They would be questioned. However, when 6 people have interviewed, every person can point out to the other person that, hey, 5 other people have interviewed. Why are you pointing the gun at me?
Mm-hmm.
The third
I
thing or the
see.
third signal is the cross-functional friction increases. Whenever you see the cross-functional friction increasing, whenever the dependencies are growing, the lack of role clarity would start creating eventual bottlenecks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when a structure needs to be introduced. But the key is how, not just when. I believe you should start with decision clarity, not just org charts. Many times I've seen in my career that org charts rejig do not actually determine or define the change of power polarity. They are just paper exercises. So decision clarity is more important. Define who owns which decisions and what inputs are required. If for the same output, 5 people are taking decisions, then that's not decision clarity. You are impeding the decision clarity then. This alone, if you're able to solve for this, it's easier said than done. This is the most, toughest part, giving decision clarity. This alone solves a large part of the problem statement without adding layers. I believe then you should introduce role clarity where interdependencies are highest. See, when you are starting a firm, everyone is a generalist, everyone is doing every other thing. You do not need a formal structure. But when you get some scale, so think of it this way, when you are building from 0 to 1, you need more generalists. There would be interdependencies. Everyone would be covering for every other person, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone would be pitching in multiple areas. But when you have reached that scale of 1, and when you are scaling from 1 to 10, you need to formalize a few things. You need to introduce role clarity, who does what. Otherwise, the system will break. So what you have, what have helped you thrive in the very beginning won't help you thrive after a certain stage. You need pivots. And the final, and the other thing is keep the structure dynamic, because at every inflection point, you would need a pivot. So keep it dynamic. So what works when the organization was 100 member team won't work when the organization is 5,000, strong headcount. You need to keep it slightly fluid, slightly dynamic. When you are able to introduce that level of fluidity, you start to eliminate ambiguity. And the goal should always be to remove unnecessary ambiguity, which slows down execution. If these things are done right, structure should actually increase speed by reducing confusion, not slow it down. It usually in if you study the companies who have scaled over decades in a very organic way, you will see that they have been able to do that. I mean, by introducing the different kinds of structure at different inflection points, by keeping it fluid. And they have, at all of these inflection points, they would have reduced confusion, not increased ambiguity. And that's the North Star you should be chasing.
I see the point. it looks really interesting and comprehensively, especially when you start elaborating on the process itself, when you start diving deeper into it, right, in order to understand that the having these boundaries is a must, right?
Hmm.
Boundaries in responsibilities and execution, as you said, right, and the level of quality you're delivering across these processes and procedures. And there are a lot of examples when, unfortunately, though you invested a lot of efforts into making structures, into making, say, rules and boundaries, right, unfortunately, it does not pay it's not paid off in the end. And there are a lot of examples when one bad hire early on can affect far more than a single role. Maybe you've heard about it, Surobheet. So we remember, I do remember the case with Uber happened in 2017.
Hmm.
Despite documented proof, Uber's HR department refused to punish the manager because he was a high performer. Looks
Hmm.
like a classic mistake where performance is prioritized over character.
Hmm.
And then, what are the consequences of such a decision? There was a social media campaign, hashtag delete Uber, which saw 500,000 users delete the app in a single week. And the
Hmm.
company's valuation reportedly dropped from, if I'm not mistaken, $70 billion to $48 billion in secondary markets during the crisis. Can you imagine? Almost twice.
Hmm. Hmm.
Thus, here with this example, we should always remember that we need to, when scaling the wrong people,
Hmm.
be ready to quietly slow down the entire company. Just be ready for this. And based on your experience, Surabhit, on experience of your cross-industry leadership and HR guidance, what are the most common hiring or team mistakes you see founders make early on? Or maybe not only early on, maybe when they already hired those people, right? And they simply cannot either confess to someone, right? They made mistake, or they're quite well with what's happening because they received the results and financial aspect which they expected.
Hmm. That's a very interesting question. Across my experience, my experience in heavy manufacturing, hyper growth tech, and highly regulated finance, uh, a few hiring mistakes and team design mistakes show up consistently and they compound quickly. The first would be hiring for urgency,
Mm-hmm.
hiring for urgency instead of trajectory. When you are building a team, you can optimize for hiring quick rather than actually plugging an immediate gap. That's what many decision makers ignore. Because see, when you are hiring for pace
Mm-hmm.
instead of hiring for the right trajectory,
Mm-hmm.
uh, this can create a constant churn and a capability gap within the next 12 to 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
The second hiring mistake that I've seen is over indexing on pedigree. Strong brands on a resume or a Ivy League degree on the resume don't guarantee performance in an unstructured environment. In a ambiguous environment, which is very common with a startup, you need builders, but you often tend to hire operators from a highly structured setup who would eventually struggle for support. So think of it this way: you are building a company from scratch, which does not have those defined processes, and you are hiring someone from a very structured company like a Meta or a Google or an Apple. When they come into a unstructured ecosystem, it's a cultural shock for them. So many a times, over indexing on the career pedigree or the academic pedigree may not be the right choice. It
Mm-hmm.
may be a recipe of disaster.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm not saying that don't hire for pedigree.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's one of the aspects where the hit ratio would be higher in terms of
Mm-hmm.
getting the right people, but don't over index on. The third area where I've seen hiring going south is unclear roles and overlapping mandates.
Mm-hmm.
See, early teams are built with vague charters. Although it brings flexibility initially, but very quickly it can turn into a lot of work duplication, conflict, and accountability issues. So, in your mind, you need to be clear for what exactly I'm hiring. Many a times, the role is clear on paper, but not in the minds of the decision maker,
Mm-hmm.
right? Another area where I've seen a lot of hiring, going south would be delaying hiring for critical roles. Many a times I've seen this conundrum that this is a critical role, we need to go slow, we need to
Mm-hmm.
hire the right person. But in that struggle for, or in that constant struggle for looking for the right person, you are actually delaying the very thing that you want in the first place, especially in areas like risk, finance, operations. Uh, the decision makers need to prioritize growth roles and treat control functions as secondary. It will create invisible risks that surface later, and it will really hit you hard. Another area would be confusing culture with comfort. See, hiring people who fit in, who gel in, rather than people who raise the bar
Mm-hmm.
is a classic hiring mistake. We often hear the word culture fit. A very interesting fact, if you
Mm-hmm.
ask 10 different leaders in the same organization, what is your definition of a culture fit? Their by default answer would be something which looks very similar to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a psychological trap. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there is nothing standard about being a culture fit. If
Mm-hmm.
you hire too many people who fit in, who gel in, who are similar to yours, you
Mm-hmm.
risk being a Kodak who may get
Absolutely.
redundant, right?
Indeed.
So instead of hiring for a culture fit, I'm not saying don't hire for culture fit, but
Mm-hmm.
don't over index on it.
Mm-hmm.
Hire for people who also disagree with you, who can raise the bar, and hire people who are better than you, right? The
Absolutely.
last area is weak assessment rigor. Too much reliance on interviews. As I told you, interviews are only, signals. Always have something in terms of giving a case scenario or a problem statement that the person has solved for in the past and can solve in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Give a problem statement, see what the person comes up with rather than just relying on a verbal interview.
Mm-hmm.
See, in today's age, if you Google or if you go on YouTube and uh, if you start searching for what kind of how to structure my answer to make myself appear a better candidate, you'll find hundreds of ways. So in today's age, you need to see through that clutter. You need to see through that, sugar polished answer. And you need to see where the hard skill of the person lies. Cool. So if I had to distill it, most of the hiring mistakes comes from short-term thinking and lack of clarity on what the business actually needs to scale. And the real problem is these mistakes don't show up immediately. They sit quietly in a system, and by the time they become visible, they are much, much harder and much more expensive to fix.
I see. Sugar polished answers, love it. So we'll include it into my vocabulary. To be honest, because usually it looks like that. Leader is hiring people who tell polished answers, right? Not people who tell a crossword during the interviews, unfortunately. But for some cases, having the stress interviews, right, or this battle
Yep.
interviews can really show a talent, not simply not a talent, but real skill set that
Not only
your
real skill
business
set,
is
but
in need at the moment.
not only real skill set, but you also should test for, the underlying behavioral traits. I
Mm-hmm.
always do a stress testing
Mm-hmm.
in the final round of the interview.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I see a person getting agitated,
Mm-hmm.
on some or the other areas, I ask that question 2 or 3 times in a different way, just to
Mhm.
see if the person is calmly handling it or if he's getting agitated further. Because, in real work scenario, there would be many points where there would be conflict, there would be disagreement. So
Mhm.
how you handle that becomes very important. If you are not able to handle it in a 30-minute conversation, it's highly likely that you are not going to be able to handle those conflicts when it actually surfaces on the floor of the organization.
Mhm. I see, fully agree. And I like the idea that you raised the topic of bureaucracy because usually it's the most important barrier that some companies should either overcome at some points or get on well with in order to keep moving in their businesses. And especially when applying the rules, you as a founder or as a leader should always mind the context and conditions that what we are talking about today throughout our webinar, because what works for a team of 10 unfortunately or in most cases won't work for a team of 50 or 100 people. And here's a good example. In 2002, Google's co-founder Larry Page, he decided that managers of a higher level were a layer of bureaucracy. That's what you were talking about,
Mhm.
Surobheet, during our sessions. And basically, this layer of bureaucracy slowed down engineers. And imagine that a team size of roughly 10 to 20 people. The flat structure worked, engineers collaborated directly, and communication was organic, and people were inspired, and everyone wanted to contribute. However, as the headcount and this management layer uh, uh, was excluded and the team started growing and approached 100 people, the system suffered a lot. There were a lot of consequences. I'm sure that not each of them will be officially posted, right, and discussed with the audience. Yet, in those conditions, what I found that Google was forced to reintroduce managers again. Well, not just within years, but within just months, maybe even weeks after understanding that they made this crucial mistake. And even later, the brand launched a specific project named Oxygen. Uh, in structure, it's a multi-year study that statistically proved that while managers in a team of 10 are optional, they are mathematically essential for a team over 50 to maintain productivity and psychological safety. Can you imagine a mistake that forced people, the entire organization, to conduct a mathematically based research? I'm
Mhm.
inspired here. I admire those people. I admire the brand after that because this proves why they're so strong in the market because they are learning from their mistakes. Yet the last question from our session today. As teams grow, whether in startups or large organizations like Capitalmind, or regardless of the brand you're working, what is usually the first thing that breaks in people, structure, or culture based on your own experience, or maybe based on some examples you saw in the market?
Okay. See, when people ask what breaks during a rapid growth, the standard answer that you will always hear from multiple leaders would be culture.
Mm-hmm,
But culture, as per me, is a lagging indicator.
mm-hmm,
By the time the culture starts feeling toxic, the
mm-hmm,
actual foundation would have broken about a
mm-hmm,
year earlier.
mm-hmm,
See, whether you are scaling a digital hyper growth startup or building the structural frameworks, the very first thing that breaks is the organizational context. See, when a team is 20, when an organization is having 20 people in a
mm-hmm,
very, early state, everyone would have a perfect context. Everyone would be sitting on the same floor without
mm-hmm,
any cabins. Everyone would be able to hear the CEO's phones or phone calls or
mm-hmm,
the team or the Google Meet calls or the Microsoft Teams call.
mm-hmm,
Everyone knows why a decision was made, under what context was made. But eventually, when the organization scales beyond 100, 200, 500, or maybe 1,000 people, a massive fracture occurs, because that is the time when you are not able to, or when I say the word you, the employees are not able to understand under what context the decision has been made.
Mm-hmm.
So I would break it down into three specific failures. The first one would be the context collapse.
Mm-hmm.
In in the early days, the leader communicates the why, and everyone understands the why behind it because you
Yeah.
are closely knit. As the company scales, everyone gets busy. The leader stops communicating the why and only communicates the what. Hey, do
Mm-hmm.
this, do that. I need this by 6 p.m. today. I need
Mm-hmm.
that by tomorrow EOD.
Mm-hmm.
They are just handing out tasks. When intelligent employees lose the strategic context behind the work, they become disengaged and they start, becoming more of a laggard than an actual problem solver. And that's where the nervous system of the company starts fracturing. The second area would be transitioning from an informal trust to a systemic trust. See, when an organization is small, it runs on informal trust. I know you, you know me, so we
Mm-hmm.
trust each other. But as you grow, see, when you are growing the firm, usually your first set of hires would come from your known contacts.
Indeed.
Otherwise, who'd take the bet on you when you don't have the money, right? So everyone knows you, both of you know each other, so you will trust each other. But when you scale up, you may not know the other person whom you are working with. You can't simply have you simply can't have personal connects with everyone in the company.
Mm-hmm.
The breakdown happens when the leaders fail to replace informal trust with a systemic trust. That is exactly why we are currently so focused on building robust governance frameworks and structured organizational architecture, uh, because you have to build for transparent systems so people can trust the process even if they don't know you personally. The third one is the middle management layer, and that is the layer which becomes the conduit between the top management and the executors at the bottom layer. They are suddenly caught between a C suite demanding an aggressive execution and the frontline employees who are confused and burnt out. So they are always kind of squeezed.
Mm-hmm.
Most companies underinvest in early leadership development.
Mm-hmm.
These managers, usually who are in the middle layer, many a times they would have become a manager from an individual contributor
Mm-hmm.
without a formal training
Mm-hmm.
or without a formal leadership development charter. And these managers would initially lack the tools to translate that high level strategy into a ground level reality. And they become a bottleneck instead of a bridge. So, I mean, that is one of these are the aspects which, so if I have to simplify it, scale breaks the shared understanding before it breaks anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Unless the founding team and the leaders actively rebuild that alignment through clarity, communication, and decision discipline, everything else starts deteriorating. I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely, not only my questions, Surobheet, but the questions of other listeners who will probably check the webinar, who will probably go through the insights.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, for those who are listening attentively, it's time to wrap up. Surobheet, I'm very thankful for your time, for this insightful hour, where you contributed to the discussion with your experience and with the years of battles with co-founders and management when hiring the right and talented people to the teams.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. If there's one thread across everything we discussed, it's this. Organizations don't fail because of a lack of intent. They fail because of lack of clarity on people, decisions, and priorities as they scale. And the earlier founders and leaders start thinking about these structural levers, not reactive fixes, the stronger and the more resilient their organizations become. I really appreciate the platform that you gave me and the opportunity to, share my perspectives. Would be looking to reconnect in some other time, in some other place or some other platform. and have a session on our, shared vision on how to make the corporate ecosystem a better place for people.
Absolutely, will definitely the universe will definitely find us chance for everyone, and maybe to those who begin this their founder's journey. I would say you should always remember, if you want to go fast, you may go alone, but if you aim to go far, you should not just can, you should go together. So as Surabheet told us, don't forget to hire the right people when scaling, especially when scaling your ideas, because ideas start companies, but people build them. Bye for now, and chat with everyone who will join the platform next time. See ya.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Renata, again. It's been a privilege. Loved the energy today. I hope everyone listening walked away with few practical insights they can apply immediately. Thanks again for hosting such a great session. Bye bye.